Or to this computer. All right. So to get started, Peter just asked me how long I've been thinking about this whole thing, and so I thought this was a good place to actually start the recorded conversation. So here we go. So by training, I am a software engineer, and I work on FDA regulated medical devices. So I have always had kind of a logical way of thinking, as well as a process oriented mind. And so, throughout the whole time I've been inside the movement, you know, I have kind of observed, how things go, and you know, rattled around in my head different possible tweaks that could go on, within the processes that we've used for voting throughout the guidance standard, um, and more recently. Um, and then those thoughts have just kind of rattled around in my head. I've had a couple conversations with people who have held votes and, kind of thrown out different ideas, different suggestions. Um, None of them were ever really accepted, which is fine. I mean, in some ways, I don't approach this problem as a what's right or what's wrong, but rather a what's best suits the needs for us as a within this movement. Um, and so ultimately, all these ideas were rattling around in my head, and finally it came time to put pen to paper, and that happened actually last Friday. Um, so that would be October 4th of 2019. Um, and so the whole thing probably took me about 30 minutes in the morning before work, and then another hour after work. Um, and so that was the first time I actually wrote anything down. And so it was pretty recent, that this all kind of came out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, with that lead in, though, I also want to emphasize that, again, I don't think that mine is that what I've kind of put forth is necessarily right per se, in like a moral judgment.
Hmm.
I've thought through a lot of the issues, and to my mind, this is it's a step forward for several reasons, and it's been informed by the past. I don't think I could have wrote this 2 years ago or even 1 year ago. I have learned as things have gone forth, um, and I hope other people have as well. That we're always trying to look at what we learned and what we ought to have learned throughout all these experiences.
Yeah.
And so I guess let's kind of jump in. So today I wanted to kind of walk through the whole process document with an eye towards answering the question, answering the questions. Well, what was I thinking? As I came up with all this stuff. Why propose all this? And what does it mean? Because there's certain parts that may not be obvious. I anticipate aren't obvious, but once we kind of talk through them, maybe they'll become a little more clear. What I'm trying to accomplish, I guess. Um, and so, whether the document's format is appropriate or not, this is what felt right to me as I was putting pen to paper. Um, and so it starts off with a preamble. As people who have accepted and seek to fulfill the covenant from the Lord first offered in 2017 in Boise, Idaho, we recognize that there are occasionally certain matters that require the voice of the people to be obtained, that cannot be approved at the individual, family, or fellowship levels. This process is intended to provide an agreed upon way to create, discuss, and ultimately approve proposals as a people. Um, right away, this begs the question, well, what are these subjects? And so I can answer with what is my own opinion about the matter. Ultimately, we as a people have to kind of, come up with what this list is as well. Because again, within this document, there's nothing that actually limits the nature of proposals. People can propose, in theory, anything. To my mind, this is a fairly limited set of topics, which, as far as I know at this point, only includes two things. One, any amending to the canon of Scripture. That's kind of been the most recent question at hand. Is should we add a new section?
Yeah.
And then two, we have one general office, that of the central recorder for the names of those who have been baptized, currently held by Keith Henderson. I think this process could address issues, if Keith was to ever become unable to fulfill his current position, or if there were any other questions pertaining to, that office. I mean, as far as I know, we don't have any guidance on, how long a person fills that role or anything like that. I think those questions could be answered, through this process. But that's a pretty small list. I think pretty much everything else, can be handled at an individual, family, fellowship, or I guess committee levels. And so, the entire scriptures, the temple fund, all our conferences, all those have been successfully handled at a lower level that doesn't require the entire movement to come together to make a decision. And for me, I think that model continues to make sense. Ultimately, though, again, I'm not, even though it's my idea, we as a people, have to are the final arbiters of what it is that we're doing, right? Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the guiding concepts. So this is another thing that, in my mind, I before I wrote anything, I told myself that, part of whatever this process is, we need to have a set of guiding concepts that really directs the conversation. Because if we don't agree on what these concepts are, or people have a different set of principles in their mind, it doesn't matter what you write. People will try to thwart the intent of the process. And so, these were the 5 things that to me were the question at hand. And so the first one is equality. All covenant holders have equal opportunity within this process. While certain individuals may facilitate the logistics of the different parts, no one holds any special privileges in deciding which proposals are advanced. So, I think at a concept level, there wouldn't be anyone who says, oh, well, I don't believe in equality. But it's a difficult thing actually to say what equality is and what it means. So for instance, I've got a couple examples that I've kind of thought through, because you'll hear some people say, well, in Zion, we're going to be equal in every way. And so I say, okay, well, is Brian Bowler and I going to be the same height in Zion? Probably not. So, I mean, are women going to grow the same and equal amount of facial hair as men?
No.
Please no. My wife just joined. So, I hope not. So, okay. So, well, not in every way. Well, what about, in the mind? So for me, we got a camper this last year, I guess it was a year and a half ago. And if I have to back this thing up, it's at least a 7-point turn. And, you know, assuming I go to Zion, like, is the moment I go to Zion, am I going to have an equal ability to back up a trailer as other people? You know, because there are people who are quite good at it, you know. And so, you know, for me, the answer to that question is also, well, no. And so then it comes back to the original question, though, then what is equality and what does that mean? And so I think you'll find within my proposal, it means that there, you know, everyone has an equal opportunity within this process. There is no special group or committee or anything else that has, you know, any rights to, you know, especially put forth proposals or to suppress proposals, you know, or anything like that. You know, and in some ways this, you know, forces a lot of trust, you know, because, you know, there's not going to be any gatekeepers that can say, you know, well, that was a silly idea, so we're not going to bring that before the body. But you know, to me, that's part of the equality of Zion. Others may disagree, and that's fine. But you know, as we talk through, you know, where we're going, I think it's important to talk through some of these reasons why. So that's equality. Transparency. As much as reasonably possible, the entire process should be transparent. The process itself should be clear and unambiguous. It should be very easy for anyone to know the state of any proposal. So again, this is another question about trade-off, and it's a trade-off question. And I'll kind of combine transparency with consistency because they're somewhat related. The process should be consistent from proposal to proposal. The process itself can change as improvements are identified and approved, but proposals suggested at the same time should be handled in the same manner. So, you know, you can kind of see that there is a trade-off because, you know, some people have rightly pointed out, well, you know, is this inflexible? Is this, you know, too rigid and prevent us from, you know, following the spirit in certain situations? You know, it's a valid question. You know, for me, as I thought through it, you know, it's better to be in a situation where it's consistent, where, you know, there will never be any question of favoritism or, you know, any did anyone short circuit some of the process, you know, that isn't available to everyone else. And so, you know, with that in mind, you know, for me, it's worth some of the rigidity as, you know, to accept as a protection against, you know, any questions of, you know, is there any undue favoritism or, you know, anything like that. Guiding concept number 4, free expression of thought. Those who suggest improvements, have concerns, or oppose a proposal have the same right to express their views as those who propose. Equal accommodations will be made to let all state their positions. To me, I think this is a critical piece, you know, and it's fairly straightforward, but you know, sometimes it's hard to do. You know, in the past, when there wasn't necessarily a central place to discuss these things, this was actually really difficult. And so, you know, this one was part of the motivation to create the covenantchat.com website, to be able to help give a voice to people. You know, this was something that I heard early on from many people, that they felt like during the guide and standard process was that, you know, they had opinions, but they didn't have the right place to voice them. And I feel for that, you know, and so, you know, I'm trying to create a framework both with the proposal and with covenantchat.com to let you know, everyone have that opportunity. And then lastly, minimize barriers to participation. While global communications are easily available, travel burden should not preclude anyone from being involved in any part of this process. For me, this is another one that for a long time we were outside the Mormon corridor. We lived in Kansas City, where we didn't have anyone to fellowship with, and now we live in Boise, and so that's different. But I still have a place in my heart for those who are out, by themselves, perhaps even on different continents, who want to, be part of this movement. For me, we're at a point now where global communications are so readily available with Zoom, with the internet, that we ought to make every effort to make travel burden, just not stop anyone from being a part of the entire process. Now, again, this is a trade-off. Openly admit this, that when we do it this way, this means that the conferences are kind of limited in what they can do. You can't wait until a conference, is convened to be able to have these serious discussions, So because if we want to make sure that everyone has that opportunity, in some ways, these communications need to happen before these conferences, and the conferences are largely there for votes. It's a trade-off, admittedly. But I come back to thinking that this is what will be the best solution for those throughout the entire world. That for now we can do this. Let's do this. On the flip side, yeah, written communication's been kind of a big deal. It's been a difficult thing, I should say. So far on covenantchat.com, I haven't seen anything that I would question as contentious or disagreeable. I think we've hopefully we've moved on from some of the situation with the guidance standard. I'm hopeful of that. But in some ways, I still think these types of face-to-face calls, over phone, within fellowships, through Zoom or whatever, this is probably the preferred method. And so absolutely anyone can post anytime on covenantchat.com. But for me, I probably noticed I haven't actually responded to anything. Not because, I don't want to, but I've kind of delayed to work through the conversations like this. Where you can hear people's voice, you can see how they're talking, you can kind of, definitely, I don't want to say judge their heart, but, kind of evaluate, where they're coming from a lot better than you can in written communication. Okay, so with that in mind, basically I tried to come up with what's essentially, in my mind, fairly minimalist for how do we create proposals, how do we discuss them, and ultimately how do we approve them. And so part one, anyone may draft a written proposal at any time. The proposer must then persuade an additional 24 covenant holders to agree that the proposal is worthy of consideration. Text of the proposal, proposer, and list of supporters is then given to those who will facilitate the rest of the process. It is now an official proposal. A couple things here to discuss. So one, the number 24. Is there anything magic about 24? Not as far as I know. That just seemed kind of a natural number to pick. That's high enough so that we take these proposals seriously. That we're not just accepting. I didn't want to have 100 proposals to go over every conference, and so going through the process of getting another 24 people seems like a high enough threshold to ensure that these are serious things and have broad support. Could it be a different number? sure, I started with 24. I mean, at this point, I think I saw that there were 191 people on Covenant Chat. So, being able to persuade 1 in 7 doesn't seem that hard given the new medium that's available. The other part is that the people who are supporting, as far as I'm concerned, throughout this process, anyone can vote at any point, any way. So even if you support, a proposal, you're not signifying that, yes, I'm going to vote for this. I myself could, as far as I'm concerned, propose alternatives to my own proposal. And so we're totally free. All we're saying when you put your name as one of those 24 people is that I think that this is worthy for group discussion and ultimately a vote. Okay? All right, part 2, discussing a proposal. Official proposals will be posted in a conspicuous location for people to read and ponder. Merits and shortcomings of the proposal can be discussed by all. Any suggested improvements can be given to the proposer. Ultimately, the proposer is free to accept or reject these suggestions as he or she feels appropriate, but the idea is to build consensus during this part. So, yeah, there's a lot that could be said about this discussion phase. For me, the natural thing is that people want to gather together to discuss these ideas, ultimately, yeah, to build consensus. And so, this is hopefully a free exchange of ideas, and hopefully that we both, both sides can do gentle persuasion, as well as be persuaded. Hopefully that as you go through these conversations, that you actually learn some things about other people, and can hopefully both grow and come together and create something that's better than than either of you could have done individually. And this has already happened with this proposal. I will say this. So the initial one that I drafted, a week and a half ago, did not have the part about line item alternatives, which we'll discuss. But I realized after speaking with someone who thought that the 24 was too high, and also that the 2/3 approval vote was too high, that he had his own numbers, and I was like, oh, well, those are really two separate conversations. Whether it's 24 or whether it's 2/3, you can really discuss those. They don't have to be discussed as either 24 and 2/3 or 12 and simple majority. That you could have a situation where it's 24 and simple majority. That maybe that's what the people really want, and so it seemed like a great way to improve the process, to make it easier to go with. And so even already, that has been updated. So far, no updates have been made to the document since I first published it. I am going to make a note about adding committee to the bit from individual, family, or fellowship levels in the preamble, because I think that's a good addition. Came to me just as I was talking through it. And then that's how easy it is. There's nothing super complicated about changing things. This is intended to be an easy thing. Come together, discuss it, think about it, and make updates that make sense. Ultimately, the proposer is the one who makes those decisions for the original proposal. And so, but of course, people are free to create alternatives, at any point if they disagree, which leads us to part 3. If there are irreconcilable differences of opinions about the proposal, anyone may write and submit an alternative proposal. This requires an additional 24 covenant holders to become official. These will also be posted and discussed in the same manner. There are 2 kinds of alternatives, major and line item. A major alternative is one that differs from the original proposal in many ways. It is a completely new solution to the same question. A line item alternative differs only in one aspect. Line item alternatives allow the body to consider specifics independently while still working within what is substantially the same proposal. So, to me, the immediate example that comes to mind is some of the Native American approaches. To me, would be a major alternative because it really differs in a lot of ways. But the question about whether 24 is the right number or 12 or 7 or whatever, that to me is a line item because essentially we're proposing the same general framework with just a small deviation. And so that allows us to tackle these questions one at a time. First off, do we want something that's looks kind of like this proposal? Do we want something that looks like a Native American? And then once we pick that one, then we can pick between the different specifics within that framework. Okay.
Okay.
Part 4, locking down of proposals. Votes shall not take place any sooner than 1 month from the time the original proposal is posted as official. 2 weeks prior to the vote, the text of the original proposal shall be locked down with no further edits permitted. At 1 week prior to the vote, no additional alternatives will be accepted, and those proposals shall be locked down. This time period permits sufficient time for all to review the final text under consideration. So as I thought through this process, one, I wanted to make sure that that we're not rushed in these decisions, that people have a good amount of time to ponder and pray, to compare against the scriptures. So 1 month to me seemed like a good number. Obviously, the longer we have, to me, I think that's a better solution. Like now, the soonest conference that I'm aware of is the one in March. So we've got like 5 months to iterate through this. And so part of this process as well is that, well, at some point we have to actually say, okay, the voting is open at some point. And so for me, I kind of worked back and said, well, the voting can be done 1 week prior to the conference. So people online have a whole week to, at their leisure, vote. And so that's where 1 week comes from. And then in the back of my mind, since the proposals can be adjusted at any time, that we needed to lock down the original proposal prior to locking down alternatives. So for instance, in mine, if someone comes to me and really persuades me that 12 is the right number, not 24, but does this a day before the lockdown, that's not really fair to those who actually really did like 24. So that week in between gives people an opportunity to write alternatives that to the original that may have changed, just prior to the lockdown date. Hopefully that makes sense. What I was aiming for.
Yeah.
Good. All right, part 5, choosing from among alternatives. If there is at least one alternative to a proposal, the next step is to select a single proposal as the one to be voted upon in an up or down manner. Each person will vote for their single most preferred option. If no one proposal obtains over half the votes, it is the one that will be voted upon in the next part. If no option has more than half the votes, then half rounding down of the proposals that receive the fewest number of votes are eliminated from consideration. A new round of voting is conducted in the same way. This is repeated until one proposal receives more than half the votes. Major alternatives are voted first. After that, line item alternatives are done, with only those that still apply needing to be voted upon. So this was kind of wordy, but the idea is that people should feel free to vote for actually what is their preferred proposal. So Peter, you wrote a post online that directly addresses what I thought was the source issue, and that is, in American politics, we see that you end up with a two-party system, and that you actually often end up voting for something that you don't like because you want that over whatever the major party alternative is to that. And so this says, no, you can always vote for your highest preferred choice. And then the ones that receive the fewest votes, basically half are eliminated each time. And so, this can actually fairly quickly whittle down the list. So if there was something like, say, 28 different proposals, I don't remember what the original guidance standard had, but it was something like 28. I'll use 28 as an example, but 28, everyone votes. If there's no one that has over half, then you whittle down the bottom 14. Those are eliminated from consideration. Do it again. 7 are eliminated. Do it again. 3 are eliminated. You're at 4 now. 4 goes to 2. And then at that point, unless it's an exact tie, one of those will get more than half of the vote. And so, 28 to 14 to 7 to 4 to 2, even within all that, it would only take 5 rounds of voting to decide amongst 28, which, sure, that sounds like a lot of voting, and in some sense it is, but, to whittle down from 28 to 1, hopefully that's not too bad. All right. Part 6, the approval vote. The last step is to vote to decide whether the selected proposal is approved or not. This is a single yes or no vote. So the thresholds are then defined based off the path. So there are 3 ways that a proposal can be adopted. Path 1, an online discussion with general conference and online vote. With this path, parts 1 through 4 are all done online, while parts 5 and 6 are done both online and at a general conference. For those who are not attending the conference, means will be provided a week prior to the conference for people to vote online to rank order their preferences for part 5. So rank order means that, well, let me come back to rank order.
Okay.
Rank order their preferences for part 5, as well as give a yes or no response for each proposal for part 6. Conference attendees are expected to come informed of any and all proposals. The approval vote requires at least 2/3 of the votes in favor to approve. This is the preferred path and should generally be used. So rank order simply means that you list 1, 2, 3, 4, what your preference is on a particular topic. So if it's like the guidance standard and there's 28 of them, if you're not present at the conference, you actually have to list 1, 2, 3 on down to 28, what your order of preference is, because that's the only way, and we'll have to have some sort of computer to do the counting, that once you eliminate these from consideration, whatever's the highest left on the list becomes your new favorite one. This is actually pretty easy in most cases because there's not going to be 28, I'm going to guess. There's going to be like 3 or, in which case you just say, well, I like, door number 1 first, then my second choice is door number 3, and then my last choice is door number 2. And it works out pretty easily.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, if you did say 1, 3, 2, then at the conference in the first round of voting, 1 is the vote that gets cast for you. If 1 is the one that's eliminated, then you drop down to, 3 is the one in the second round of voting.
Yeah, that makes more sense now.
Yeah. So, again, it would be kind of a pain we'd have to have computer support if we had something like, more than like 4, to handle the counting, efficiently. But, even 3 is pretty easy to do. And then along with that, if these are alternatives, like alternatives, then you also have to vote yes or no for part 6. So you could say, all right, if door number 1, yes, I could approve that. You also have to say if door number 3 is the one, then you say, yes, I approve that one too. But you could still say no to door number 2. So really, but you have to answer for each of the alternatives. What are the ones that, where's your line of yes or no? So if you vote online, it's a little bit more complicated because you have to provide all the information based off of all the votes that could happen. But, again, it shouldn't be too complicated, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and so if you do this one, this is the normal path with the online discussion and then the voting that happens online and at the conference. This is the preferred path. It should be the one that's used most of the time. And I picked 2/3. There's serious arguments that ought to be considered for, everything from simple majority up to unanimous. I was kind of persuaded down the middle and picked 2/3. Again, I don't think there's anything magic about that value, but it's a starting point to say, this has pretty broad approval. Path 2, online discussion and vote. If an urgent matter arises that cannot wait for the next general conference, the entire process can be done online. The approval vote requires at least 90% of the votes to approve. So with these more serious situations, that really require a quick response, or if we ever are in a situation where we don't have a conference that's, planned, you can still move forward, but it requires, basically a consensus amongst the people. Not unanimous, but a very large consensus. And then lastly, a general conference discussion and vote. Me always considering the world going down the tube. If there's ever a time where the means are not available to handle the process online, the entire process can be done at a general conference. This is kind of end of the world type stuff. In this case, the timing requirements of Part 4 are removed, though sufficient time should be granted. The approval vote requires at least 90% of the votes in favor to approve. Okay, so again, extreme situations should have, very, very high approval rates. All right, conducting votes at a general conference. The conductor of a vote will announce the results of the online voting first. The vote at the conference will be a standing vote. If a person is unable to stand, they may also raise their hand. If, in the opinion of the conductor, any vote has an obvious result, they announce it as such and then ask the audience if there are any objections to the observation. If anyone objects, the proposal passes or fails. If no one objects, the proposal passes or fails as indicated. If a single person objects or the conductor does not feel the result obvious, then a count must be taken and the results announced. So, often, you have these votes and it's obvious that, if you've got 90+% approval, there's no need to do a count, if you're at a threshold of 2/3. Or if it's unanimous, why go through the process of counting, but, we're not giving the conductor any real power that no one else has. And so, if he thinks it's obvious, he or she, they can say, okay, I think it's obvious, but then literally if anyone objects, then they can trigger a count. All right, so the last bit is about ratification and amending this process. So this process is considered a proposal itself. If approved, then the process is ratified. So this has always been a curious question of how do we actually get something on the books when we don't have anything on the books to get something on the books. You know, and it's a serious question. You know, for me, I think that what I've put forth, you know, it's my opinion that it's a fair and balanced proposal. But I certainly don't have the authority to foist this upon upon the body, and you know, I kind of doubt that anyone else has the ability to push you know, a different process on. And so within my own thinking, then, that we need to, you know, that it's good enough that if we use it and we get, you know, we get everything checked off, then that's good enough to say that this is our process moving forward. And so, you know, towards that end, I did gather, turned out to be myself and 26 others who supported it. Their names are listed on covenantchat.com. And so, you know, we're certainly more than a month away from any conference. And so, you know, to me, this was the natural way to get something ratified. And then lastly, this process is amended through the proposal process. So anything, you know, you can make any changes. We as a body can make any changes at any time through the proposal process itself. So in that way, you know, it's not the be all end all. I never intended it to be. And so we can address this at any time, just follow the process. So that kind of walks through my part of the thinking that I had throughout this. So as I said online, you know, really this has a lot of impact on us as a people. And I don't want this to be the thing that Jimmy came up with. You know, that if this is what we want, if we as a people say, you know what, we think that this is a good way for handling these situations as they arise, that you know, we as a people own this. So you know, whether it's me who you know, addresses questions that other people have, of concerns that other people have, you know, in some way we all have to live with whatever we end up doing. And so, you know, I'm not looking to go to a place where, you know, where I'm the one who's defending this. So please consider, you know, if you agree with where I was going, you know, and feel definitely empowered to answer any questions, to state any concerns, everything like that. So with that, I didn't really have anything else. So if there's any, we've got 15 minutes or so. If anyone has any questions or comments, it's Mike.
Hi. Jimmy, my question was primarily around Keith Henderson's concern that it has to be done by conference. Is that, I didn't follow that whole argument. Is that something that is actually already in our scriptures? Is that an old thing dating back to 1830? Is that, I mean, how important is that, I guess?
So, you know, I may not be the right person to ask that to, because obviously in mine, you know, there is a path for online only. So I am unaware of any scriptures that say that this has to be done at a conference. You know, I know that one of the posts the scripture committee said was that they said that needs to be done at a conference. I don't know the background that led them to say that.
Okay.
But that's what triggered a lot of this conversation recently.
Jimmy, I may be able to shed some light on that a little bit. This is Reed.
Oh, hey, Reed.
If you go to the glossary and you look up the term scriptures, you will see that Denver has a sentence in there where he says scriptures must be added, or you can add to the canon at a general conference.
Okay.
So he did say that. It's right there in black and white. But it is in relation to scriptures, not in relation to other potential things that might be brought before the body, if that makes sense.
Okay. So.
Thanks, Reed.
Yeah.
So in other words, what Keith Henderson was pointing out is to add to or alter the scriptures, that must be done according to the glossary and according to Denver's words there. It must be done in a general conference. But this proposal isn't to add anything to the scriptures. This proposal is to create a framework where we can bring things before the body, whether it's an addition to the canon or anything else. And so therefore this doesn't have to be at a general conference.
But then the proposal that Chris came forward with for the scriptures would have had to have been done through the conference, correct?
Yes, that would have had to have been done through a conference, which is why he took down the online vote. Because after it was pointed out to him that Denver previously said that this must be done in a conference, he realized that and he took down the online vote and then turned around and tried to schedule a conference, right?
Right.
And then realizing that we really don't have a framework yet and there's some other complications that made it so that really wouldn't work either, then withdrew that proposal as well. But regarding adding to the canon, yeah, that's supposed to be done at a general conference. Regarding other proposals, that does not have to be done at a general conference. So I think that's my understanding anyway, and I'm certainly open to other ideas and open to clarification, or if I am misunderstanding Denver's words there in the glossary, then I'm open to being corrected on that.
I'll go ahead and add that the vote for where Keith Henderson was approved as the central recorder was an online only vote, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I'm pretty sure that was well before our first general conference.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and we've also had other things done by online vote. For example, multiple instances of guidance standard related issues, or preparatory votes prior to a general conference where we were trying to whittle down things. Also polls to ask, if people would like this or that, or how many scripture sets would you order. There have been lots of different versions of online votes or polls and things. And the difference between those and this, I think, is important because we're looking here at a proposal for bringing things before the entire body. And oftentimes with those other votes and proposals, the body didn't even know they were happening much of the time. So I think it's an important detail to make sure that there's proper notification, if there is going to be something that's done outside of a general conference.
And that speaks to the point too that we really need to have this common place where we can all talk about these things, rather than Adrian's comments. It's not fair to Adrian, really. But it was the only place after the scripture blog was shut down, so.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have about 5 minutes maybe to talk about at the end, but we still have probably about 5 minutes before that. Was there anything else that anybody wanted to ask? Any concerns?
I've got a question. So when a proposal, after it gets 24 or however many people who think it should be brought before the body, and after it becomes an official proposal, is there any way for it to be dropped? And if there's not a whole lot of agreement, and if does it have to go through to the end and be voted down, or can it be dropped before that if people decide it should be dropped?
Well, the question, so I thought about this, and I didn't end up putting anything in here for that. Because one, the question in my mind was, well, who is that people, and what does that look like? Because in some ways, until you actually bring it to a formal vote, how do you know that not enough people don't support it? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I can conceive of situations where the original proposer may decide that he himself thinks, or he or she would like to withdraw it. But then what happens if somebody else wants to take up the banner, and carry it from there? So ultimately, in my mind, the way this is currently written is that once it gets 24 supporters plus the original proposer, then it has to be taken to vote.
Okay.
Now,
So
again, it can be changed, during the discussion process.
But the 24 people who are taking it to that point should probably keep that in consideration, that once it becomes an official proposal, if it stays worded as it is, once it becomes an official proposal, then it needs to be voted on. They should keep that in consideration when they.
Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Yeah. Okay.
Jimmy, I've got a question. It's Reed.
Please.
So what happens if some changes are made and, people say, hey, we ought to do this, we ought to do that, we do some line item changes and so forth, and it makes the original proposal turn into a situation where some of the original supporters can no longer support it. And then they withdraw their names and it falls below the threshold of 24. Then what?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, there's, once it becomes official, there's no action that can make it unofficial. I suppose someone could withdraw before 24 is reached, but once that's reached, you can always, create your own alternatives. So, if there was someone who was originally a supporter of a proposal, but it changed enough that they didn't support it anymore, I would direct them to, the alternative sub-process to, address their concerns.
And so if somebody, let's say that there is a line item alternative that's submitted. So we're going to take paragraph number 6 and we're going to replace it with this paragraph number 6, for example.
Yep.
And there's 24 people who support the new paragraph number 6, and there were 24 people who supported the old paragraph number 6. So they got two things now we have to vote on. Number one is we got to vote on whether we're going to adopt the whole thing. And number two, if we're going to adopt it, are we going to adopt with or without paragraph 6? Or in other words, with the new one or the old one. So the voting process, as I understand it, would be first, you would prepare two proposals that would go head to head. One would be with the old paragraph 6 and one would be with the new paragraph 6. And you would just vote on those to see which one got more than 50%. And whichever one did, then that one would be the one that the entire body votes on. And if it gets more than 2/3, then it passes. Is that kind of the general idea?
Correct.
And if there are multiple paragraph 6s, let's say we got 9 different paragraph 6s, then we're going to take all of those and we're going to take a preliminary vote, eliminate the bottom 50%, take another vote, eliminate, and get down to where we have at least a 50% agreement on one version. And then from there, then we'd bring it to the whole body for an up or down 2/3 vote. And so this process would handle line items. It would handle completely new alternatives. It could handle multiple versions. I mean, there's a lot of things that this would be the cure for, in terms of ways that the whole voting process could be messed up by lots of different versions.
Yeah, I wouldn't use the term messed up by, but in principle, yes, I agree with what you're saying.
Well, it could get messy. I don't mean messed up so much as it could be a pretty messy proposition if you had 28 different versions of something that are all submitted and everybody, lobbying for their own. And if one is an old version and one's a new version of the same proposal,
Yep.
Yeah,
it could be complex. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So one last. So where I wanted to kind of close is, there's kind of the overarching question of like, do we even need this? Like, are you creating guidance standard 2.0 here, Jimmy? Why even go there? And so my question then is think to yourself, what is the current process? Even though we don't have anything formally adopted, effectively, what is the current process? If I had to describe it, and again, this is my opinion about things, and other people, may word things differently, but I would say it that essentially, if someone who was the least of us, let's say someone who newly, received the covenant in Africa, if there was something that they wanted added to the scriptures, let's say, effectively, our current process is that they would appeal to, someone with a name within the movement, say Adrian, because his blog has a high viewership, or Chris Hamill, because he's been on the scripture committee, or Denver himself, and go and try to persuade them directly to push this forward, to get that going, get that ball rolling, because they themselves don't really have a good means of getting information out there. Or you could look at other committees, you could try to go to, a conference planning committee and say, hey, I'd really like, 5 minutes of time to put this proposal out there and to take a vote. For me, as I think through that, I have some doubts about that, because it puts a lot of pressure on some of these individuals to effectively be a gatekeeper and make these decisions for the group about, what are the things that should be brought forth. I don't think that's fair to them, to put them in that role. They didn't ask for it. I'm sure most of them, boy, they'd run to the hills if you were to phrase it like that. Oh yeah, I really am the gatekeeper. And so this proposal lifts that burden from them. They don't have to be that. Anyone can bring this forth and have a place now to present their own ideas and not have an intermediary to fill that role. To me, yes, it is a process. It is something that is an organization. It may seem like hey, I accept that it seems like Babylon, perhaps, but when I look at our current situation, I think this is a move in the right direction. And so with that, that was all I had. It's at 8 o'clock now. So thank you for attending. Thanks for participating. I anticipate that we will have more such conversations, and that, you know, hopefully these won't all be led by me. That we'll have some people who have some other viewpoints that ought to be discussed, and I welcome that. And thank you. May God bless us all as we strive for Zion. So with that, good night, everyone. Have a good one. Feel free to continue posting, make requests for new meetings. That's all for tonight.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah. Take care.